October 26, 1997, Jerez, Spain. Schumacher and Villeneuve fight for the championship. The German needs to finish in front of Villeneuve to secure victory. Lap 48. Schumacher is losing ground to Villeneuve, and the Canadian launches up the inside.
Villeneuve is all over him, look. He's going through. Oh, yes.
Help!
I don't think.
Help goes Michael Schumacher!
That didn't work, Michael. You hit the wrong part of him, my friend.
Schumacher veers into the side pod of Villeneuve and comes off worse, and is beached in the gravel trap. Villeneuve nurses his car to a third-place finish and the 97 World Drivers' title. But if that did not happen, join us as we enter the paradox. Welcome to the paradox. Schumacher pits after losing the lead. A valiant drive sees him overtake Villeneuve on the last lap and last corner, winning him the championship. So joining me today to kind of dig into this paradox is my co-host, R&D. Say hello.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, there's probably not going to be many ladies. It is Formula, racing, so. Anyways, so before we get into our timelines, I just want to mention real quick that on my website, foxworth.tv, I'll link it in the description down below. There will be an audio download. Hopefully I can figure that out with Google Drive. If not, then this might be a lie. And the timelines will also be in a article there on my site. I'll link that as well. So our first timeline is my timeline, and I like to call this a triumphant return to kart. So in 1998, Villeneuve returns to Williams for a disappointing season, much as in real life, and Schumacher charges and loses a close championship fight to Häkkinen.
But at this time, wouldn't Williams have sacked Jacques Villeneuve since he did not win the World Championship in '97? Because they have this sort of past history to sack the drivers that before their championship winning season.
Yeah, they did have that history of sacking, but they were so close to it in '97 that I think they would recognize that they didn't provide that best car either. So I think that they would give him another chance, and he would, have more seasons to kind of develop and really go for that title. So moving on to 1999, he does stay with Williams. They don't sack him for the second year running, but he has another disappointing season with Williams. And whether it's his decision or the team's decision, Villeneuve leaves Formula One at the end of the season. Damon Hill, on the other hand, he moves to BAR Honda to lead the charge of the new team.
Well, I think that Damon Hill would have not gone to BAR Honda because it's most likely he would have gone to another team during that time. And, with the whole Williams debacle, maybe he would have wanted another championship-winning car.
Yeah, I think you're right that maybe from Damon Hill's side, this doesn't make the most sense. However, BAR Honda really wanted a champion to lead that charge of the team. So if you look at the list of world champions at the time, you have, Mika Häkkinen has won 2 in a row. So he's there, but he's the lead horse for McLaren. And then you have Michael Schumacher, a 3-time world champion, but he is 100% on board with Ferrari. So I don't think he's going to move with Ferrari because that's his team already. Which that just leaves Hill. And other than that, you could see a shock return of Prost, but he had his own team at the time. And maybe a very shocking term, before I'd like to call the Mansell factor. But as much as it would be awesome to see Nigel Mansell in a 1999 BAR Honda, I don't think that he was looking to be in racing at that time.
Well, that's quite an interesting thought there.
So, moving forwards, 2000, Villeneuve moves back to kart to race for Chip Ganassi Racing, and he has decent success. Damon does see success with the addition of Honda. I guess I misspoke there. It was just BAR in 1999. And Schumacher secures his fourth title.
Well, I do agree with you on the fact that Jacques Villeneuve would have had decent success as Chip Ganassi had some wins during that season, but the package would have not been good enough for him overall to win the championship. And, I think Damon Hill would not have been successful with Bar Honda as Jax was in the real timeline because you'll need a very aggressive driver to pull the results out of that car.
That's some good points. In 2001, I think Damon Hill, would have a distinct lack of pace. Like you kind of said, he was not as aggressive as Jack Villeneuve, and I don't think he would have that consistency at the end of his career. So I really think that Hill would retire very early on in the season, and I think the sponsors would back out because they're looking for that world champion driver. And so BAR Honda is going to crumble midway through the season, leaving just 10 teams on the grid. And then Schumacher is going to secure his fifth title, while Villeneuve has more success in kart, and he actually founds his own team.
Well, what do you mean by more success in kart? Do you mean that he's winning the championship in that year, or do you mean he's just still winning at this point and just sort of hanging around in the grid?
I think that he could possibly win a championship, but I think it's more likely that he just sees a few more wins, has about the same amount of success. Yeah, I think it's probably about the same amount of success as the previous season, with an off, maybe unlikely chance of him winning.
And what sponsor would he have found for his team, really? I mean, I could see a Canadian company going on board with him, but nothing more than that. Would have a tobacco company backed him as well?
That's a possibility. It seems like Marlboro and BAR and all those. Gosh, what is Brothsman? It's possible that another maybe. I mean, Marlboro like sponsored every major team, so it's possible. But I think maybe like Manulife, they might have sponsored him because it's the biggest Canadian company. I really don't know if they have a history of sponsorships at all. So if you have any suggestions, people in the comments of who a sponsor might be for Jack Villeneuve, that'd be interesting to find out. I couldn't find any kind of easy resources of histories of sponsorships, so I'm no expert in sponsorships. So, but moving to 2002, I think Villeneuve invests in defunct BAR Honda team, so they're kind of sitting on the sidelines for half a season at least. And then Villeneuve Racing in kart has more success, and Villeneuve wins the 500, but he falls short of the championship.
I think you are right there because Newman Haas would have been a very challenging obstacle for Jacques Villeneuve to overcome during the season. And, I think that it would have been kind of hard for Jacques Villeneuve to find some investment for Bar Honda, but I think he could probably do it.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of fund, especially a team in Formula One, and notwithstanding a team in Formula One and a team in IndyCar. I mean, there's been very few examples of that. I mean, I think Penske tried it for a few years and he backed out. I mean, McLaren has done it before, and they're doing it again. And there's talks about Ferrari doing it, but there's a budget restriction, which might be what Ferrari's doing. So I think it is possible, and I'll continue down the timeline. I will kind of get to that. So in 2003, Villeneuve tries to compete in both series. He's still a driver. He still thinks he's competitive, but he loses out on both championships. But he scores decent points. He's maybe get a win here or there, podiums, that sort of thing. However, his teammates outperform him, and so he kind of questions his racing career at this point.
Well, it's going to be an extraordinary difficult thing for, uh, especially for someone of Jack's talent, would be to be competing in both series at the same time, and it would have been very exhausting and stressful. So I do agree with you on that kind of thing because most Formula One drivers and IndyCar drivers both face a very long and hard schedule. So I do think he might have lost motivation, but maybe he wouldn't have lost motivation for owning a race team.
Yeah, and I completely agree. So I think Villeneuve retires from racing, but he doesn't retire. He focuses on being the team principal to both teams, which leads his teams to major success. Villeneuve Honda finishes second in the constructors, and Villeneuve Racing in kart wins the championship. So I think he finds a lot of success, and I think that's kind of due to what I kind of feel like his principal style would be. I kind of see him as a Gunther Steiner kind of no nonsense attitude. Maybe not all the swearing as he's famous for in Drive to Survive, but I do see him as a no nonsense. He's going to get the job done. He's going to make sure his drivers are doing what they need to do. And if they don't do what they need to do, he's going to get in there and make sure that they understand that this is a team and it's not just them.
Well, I think he's more of a Flavio Briatore type, just the sort of guy that expects the most out of the drivers and is very patriotic towards his countrymen. And, I think he's just going to be the kind of guy that pulls the sponsors in right and left and is very political in the FIA.
So in 2005, Villeneuve Honda does take a step back, and so that makes Villeneuve kind of question it. He's funding two teams at this point, and he decides that it's a little bit too costly, so he sells the team to Honda, as it is in real life, and then that eventually turns into Braun, and that eventually turns into Mercedes, which is dominated for the past 6 seasons or 7 seasons at this point. If you weren't aware, I'm assuming that if you watch this podcast, you're well aware. So Villeneuve does keep his kart team, however, and so he remains an IndyCar staple, much like Andretti Autosport.
Would there have been possible mergers at this point of time, though? Because, I kind of see the stresses of owning a race team be kind of hard on a team driver, especially with the history of drivers becoming team owners like Alain Prost, and that he did a merger with another team. I think it was Honda, I believe. No, it wasn't. But still, the point is that the stresses of the team owning and racing in a schedule is two completely different things. That's all I'm gonna say on about this subject. But this is gonna be like hard for a driver, especially.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he did take a step back from racing. I think he realizes that early on in his team ownership that it's hard to be a team owner and somebody who races for the team. I think was it Brabham was kind of the last. Maybe Brabham and McLaren were kind of the last people that truly did that. Fittipaldi kind of did that, but his brother was mainly the person running the team. So I think he definitely takes a step back, as I said, but I don't think he reaches out for a merger. I think the opinions of Villeneuve, he's a very opinionated person, as we can see from today, very blunt and honest about what he thinks. So I don't think that he would mesh well with any partner. Like maybe an engine supplier, I could see that, because I think people would want to put an engine in his car. He's 2 or 3 time champion in kart at this point. Obviously he missed out on the Formula One title, but yeah, I think he would want to stay independent. I don't think he would mesh well with many of the IndyCar people. So I think it's time. You prepared a timeline as well. Would you like to introduce that?
Yes, I would like to introduce my timeline to the audience. I call it Mixing It with McLaren. So, 1998, Villeneuve is disgruntled by not having a championship. So, instead of going to Bayard Honda, like in the real timeline, he goes to McLaren in 1999.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's very realistic, probably more realistic than what I was saying. I could see him. I mean, it almost happened in real life. Many people have reported on this, and I think he's even said that he had an offer there, and it was Craig Pollock that kind of pulled him into his team manager or his driver manager, whatever, pulled him into this Honda BAR deal, which turned into BAR Honda, and he also kind of had that itch for owning a team, so he kind of went along with it too. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. However, he was a world champion in real life, so would that have caused issues, him not being a world champion?
Well, I don't think it would have caused any issues at all because many teams were looking at his performances, and if he was able to match world champion Damon Hill on his very first season, then it's most likely that the teams will consider giving him a chance in their championship cars.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, moving on to 1999. He struggles to handle the McLaren until the end of the season, and he puts in some good results here and there and have some wins, but he does not win overall like his teammate Hakkinen.
Did Villeneuve struggle to adapt to cars during his career?
Um, he did not previously struggle to adapt to the cars in his career, but he would struggle with the grooves that Formula One had introduced in 1998 and 99, as reference to an interview by him in those years when he was just talking about and criticizing F1 for introducing the grooves in the tires. So I believe that while that he may have struggled, but the McLaren car would have been the better car overall for that year. So moving on to 2000, he wins the title in a showdown with Schumacher and Hakkinen.
Schumacher won this championship by 19 points. How would either McLaren win if Hakkinen and Villeneuve were Alpha driver personalities? Would they take points off each other?
Well, I do think they would have taken points off each other, but I think at this point McLaren had the package to win more races that year, and with Villeneuve's and Häkkinen's input, they would have been more reliable than the original driver pairing of Häkkinen and David Coulthard, and it would have caused them to win more races that year and possibly been more reliable than the Ferrari of that year.
Really not like Coulthard, apparently, huh?
Well, I mean, Coulthard's a nice guy and all, but he's not exactly um, a strong number two, to put it politely.
Ouch.
So, moving on to 2001. He stays and wins races with McLaren, and Schumacher wins the championship in 2001.
So, what changes between the seasons to cause Schumacher to win this championship?
Well, I believe at this point, to counter the pairing of Villeneuve and Hakkinen, they would have focused completely more on power and have more radical designs than they had the year before. So it would have been a very different year, I presume, from the original timeline, but it would have been close between McLaren and Ferrari, but Ferrari would have won outright, definitely, for sure, because, Ross Brawn would have been uh, much more focused on extracting the performances out of the drivers in the car. So moving on to 2002. Schumacher, at this point in time, he is still motivated, and he is very motivated to win even more titles. And he wins with Ferrari in a dominating fashion, much like in the real timeline. And however, Hakkinen is still retiring in this timeline, and it's just gonna be a different kind of season.
Yeah, so who replaces Hakkinen? Which, by the way, it's a hiatus technically, so he could come back. McLaren is probably looking for a driver right now. I know they just signed Ricardo, but I mean, Norris, right?
Well, no, not exactly. They would have still signed Kimi Räikkönen at this point, and and I believe that Kimi Räikkönen would have been uh, a good asset to McLaren at this time, which he was in the original timeline, but he would have been possibly a better asset to than just an aging Hakkinen.
So would Villeneuve, now that he's kind of a staple in this team, and Kimmy's arrival to F1 was met with success, and so he knows that he's this competitive driver that's going to kind of maybe put his status, number one status, into question, maybe not take him over. Do you think he would have blocked Kimmy's arrival?
Well, I believe that he would have not blocked Kimi's arrival at all because seeing as he would have been number one in my timeline, he would have been more experienced at this point in time and a strong championship contender, while Kimi was still sort of getting up to speed, but he still had the raw pace and the input to develop the car as well. So moving on to 2003. Close challenges with Kimi Räikkönen and Villeneuve, and he loses out to Kimi Räikkönen due to Villeneuve taking off points. Schumacher.
So McLaren finished third in real life. How do you think they managed to eke out a championship this season?
Well, because the driving skills that Kimi and Villeneuve would have exhibited at this point in time, and that Villeneuve would have been still motivated at this point to win the championship title, as the 2003 package was possibly not the best, but it was still good enough to score points. And in that point in time, it was crucial to score points because the Ferraris were having one of their maybe not the best years or the good year. They were having a decent year, but they weren't. They were dangerously close to losing out the drivers' championship title.
So where's Barrichello in all this? Is he in the championship question? Like, is he in the discussion of champion?
Well, I do not think he would have been in the discussion as champion because, well, for one, it would have been very hard to match the raw pace of the driver pairing that the McLaren group had, well, have in my timeline, really. But it would have been extremely difficult for Barrichello to even score a single point against Kimi at all because, well, Villeneuve is also aggressive on blocking other drivers, and he's Barrichello is just not that kind of guy that would be uh, easy to be doing with because he's not going to be toe and toe with the other guys. He just prefers the kind of clean racing, but we don't know that for sure. So moving on, 2004. Villeneuve is tired of McLaren at this point, the reliability issues that have been plaguing him for the championship title in last year. He just moves to Renault and becomes number one driver to Fernando Alonso.
So given Villeneuve was winning races and challenging for titles, why would he move teams?
Well, because he would have wanted more money that comes with being a number one driver in Flavio Briatore's team, and especially the amount of money that the manufacturer was willing to put out for a world champion as well, just like Bar Honda. But they're just looking for a driver who's aggressive and can score points.
Yep, they definitely paid Daniel Ricciardo handsomely.
Well, yes, of course. They, if you can see like all the past history between their drivers in the Renault past, they've definitely had their money's worth out of the drivers. So moving on to 2005, Max Villeneuve does not win the world championship, but he puts in solid performances. Fernando Alonso still wins in this timeline, but I think it would be some team politics going on in there.
So does Villeneuve get relegated to number two status? Does he consider moving teams if that is the case?
Well, I believe that he would have been relegated to number two status in this timeline for sure, because Flavio was always going to be in favor of a guy who he brought up through the junior ranks at this point. And I think Jacques Villeneuve would have considered moving teams again, but he would have been possibly talking to several teams like Toyota, McLaren, Ferrari. At this point in my timeline, his stock market would have been at an all-time high. So moving on to 2006. Jacques Villeneuve does not win again, but he has controversy for blocking Schumacher for teammate Fernando Alonso, and he would have been paying back for Jerez 97.
So I think this is really interesting that you bring this up. I completely agree that Villeneuve might do something like that. However, Jerez 97 didn't happen in this timeline. He didn't get hit by Schumacher. I mean, maybe he's paying him back for winning the championship, but why is he blocking Schumacher for payback?
Well, that's an excellent question, but because Jacques Villeneuve was held up by Roberto Fontana and decided to give Schumacher the same treatment, and that was sort of the reason why he loses out the championship in your timeline and in my timeline also. But he would have been peeved that he lost because of that, and it was mentioned in an interview that Fontana told him about the team order by Salver at that point, and that if he wanted to ride in Formula One, he would have had to want Jacques Villeneuve, and I think Jacques Villeneuve would have kept it in himself all these years later, especially when Michael Schumacher is challenging for another title. So moving on to 2007, he does not come close to scoring a point, and he has his complete worst season since 1998. So he considers talking with McLaren, and he is considering signing with McLaren for the 2008 season in my timeline.
So Renault was third in real life. Who replaced Fernando Alonso and performed well enough to manage to come in third without having a teammate scoring points?
Well, Carlo Fisichella would have replaced Fernando Alonso. And the 2007 season, in my timeline, was good for them because Giancarlo Fisichella would have scored more points for them. Not much, but enough for them to have third in the Constructors' Championship. And I believe that, it would have been not a strong year for Renault, but it would have been a decent year for them, really. So moving on to 2008. He retires at the end of 2008 season with McLaren, and Felipe Massa becomes a championship by a point due to Villeneuve's antics with Lewis Hamilton, having a spat with him just like Fernando Alonso did the previous year, both of them scoring points.
I do like this outcome. Massa becoming a champion is something that I think a lot of fans would have loved to see. Obviously, he had that accident, and then Fernando Alonso kind of took over the team, and it's kind of bad things. But I do really like that outcome, and I definitely could see this happening given Villeneuve's controversial style. I think Hamilton definitely had an easier path to 2008 championship because he had a more willing teammate to work with him to get to the championship, unlike Fernando the previous year in real life. But yeah, I definitely see Villeneuve kind of, especially, doing the then in 2006 in your timeline, blocking Schumacher to help him lose the championship to Fernando. So yeah, I definitely could see this happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just think that Jacques Villeneuve would not have been, you know, would have not have been as forgiving as Fernando Alonso, if you believe that's possible. But it's going to be like a hard route for Lewis Hamilton during this time in my timeline. So that's the end of our timelines, and now we're going to move on to Formula One news.
Yep, and so this section is probably going to become comments on the last podcast, depending on how many comments. I encourage you to comment on our timelines, what you thought was cool, what you thought was really stupid, and feel free to go ahead and give your own timelines based off of that paradox that we gave at the beginning. And like I said, you can look at the timelines and the event on my website, foxworth.tv, and you can click on the link in the description below to get to that. So the first thing I want to talk about is Vettel leaving Ferrari and Sainz replacing him, and along with that, Ricciardo going to McLaren. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I believe Sainz to Ferrari is possibly a career-ending move because, Charles Leclerc is looking very strong at this moment in time, and that Charles would have been might have been the stronger competitor, and I believe that Ferrari will be just centered around him rather than letting Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc doing freely.
Yeah, I feel like Sainz to Ferrari is actually a really good move. I'm a big fan of Carlos Sainz. I think he can handle the pressure. He's one of the few drivers that can handle the pressure of being in a Ferrari seat. I mean, he's the son of a two-time rally champion, so the entire country is behind him, and all that pressure of being a champion and having to do well has been on his back his entire life. So I really think that he can handle this. I think it's a sensible move. If he doesn't turn out the best, then at most he becomes a really solid number two driver, and Leclerc can go to the champion and basically have a wingman Bottas as Sainz to the side. Obviously, it's kind of sad to see Vettel leave Ferrari, and I think it's an interesting move for Ricciardo to go to McLaren. I kind of see it as possibly a lateral move rather than, going forward in his career. But I know McLaren is going up and Renault is seeming to kind of stay the same. So it could turn out to be a really good move in his career.
Well, I believe that Lando and Ricciardo are going to be doing for the number one spot in McLaren. But I think Lando Norris will win out that number one spot, and Ricciardo will be a number two driver, just like he was at Red Bull to Max Verstappen.
Don't tell that to Ricciardo. Very much so thinks that he was equal terms with Verstappen, which obviously I think a lot of people came to realize that Verstappen was going to overtake him if he didn't already overtake him in skill and performance. But I really think that Norris is going to have more success this year, but I don't think he's going to overcome Ricciardo this season. Maybe a few seasons down the line. I think Ricciardo is going to have some wily old tricks to kind of cover off Lando for this season at least. Well, 2021, I should say. This season feels like it's been a whole off season, like it's already 2021 since we haven't had racing, and this off season's been forever. Anyways, so with the move of Ricciardo to McLaren, there's an open seat at Renault, and a lot of people are trying to figure out who's going to be in that seat. There's a lot of speculation around that seat. An obvious choice is Vettel. He just left Ferrari, and that seems like the most competitive seat for him to go to. So Vettel's an option. People are talking about Alonso returning to Formula One. Even Flavio Briatore is saying that he's detoxed and is ready to come back to Formula One. And then you have to consider the possibilities, some outliers. We got Gasly. We got Hulkenberg. And we got Formula 2 drivers. We have Guan Yu Zhou, and we have Christian Lundgaard. So those are two people in Formula 2 that if they do well and they maybe win the championship should have enough super license points to actually make it to that seat. So who do you think is going to eventually get that seat?
Well, I believe that Alonso would have get the seat in 2021, and he might possibly be the number one driver, especially with the historic past that he has with Renault. But do not forget the Crashgate scandal as well, because that's going to have some influence on that as well. And especially with how Fernando Alonso has the past of being a fiery, temporary driver and is very dimensional to teams. Do you think it would be wise for when Renault to be gambling on an aging driver, especially one with Fernando's talents, but he's too, do you think he's going to be too toxic for them?
I think Renault wants to gamble on Alonso, but I don't think Alonso wants to gamble on Renault. I personally think that the Vettel it's not a appetizing seat for Vettel. It's not a very good seat for Alonso to go to. I mean, he literally be behind the team he left a few years ago, because I think McLaren is going to be fighting for podiums in 2021, and I don't know if Renault's going to be. So I don't think either of those drivers are going to be attracted by that seat. The outliers, I could see Hulkenberg possibly getting a call back. I don't know if he'd want to, because he was kind of cut off by the team, and he might be enjoying his retirement. Gasly, I mean, getting two Frenchmen in the team, harken back to the days of, it was Alan Prost and, oh gosh, who was the other one?
Ayrton Senna.
Yeah, no, not French. Oh well, I forget.
John Alesi. That's who you're thinking of. Alain Prost.
No, he was not in Renault. Anyways, I'm thinking of they had an all French lineup. I think it's like Depailler or something. So obviously it was
Renault.
not.
It was
Rene Arnoux.
Yes, that's him. Yes.
So yeah, Rene Arnoux, and so it might harken back to those days by putting Gasly in the car. Obviously, there might be some issues with, teammates there, because Ocon and Gasly don't really like each other. So I think the most likely person to get that seat is Rookie of the Year in Formula 2, Guan Yu Zhou. I really think that he showed himself well in 2019. I think if we get a 2020 Formula 2 season, he's going to show up well. And I think it's going to be a good choice. And I mean, Renault's already talked about how they want to get dividends out of this driver academy that they've invested in. So I really think it makes sense for them. I think none of the veteran drivers really want this Renault seat, and I think it's going to make them look the best by putting a young driver in there.
Okay, so concerning all of this, here's another question I want to pose. Where does Sebastian Vettel land in all of this? I mean, I think with all the seats snapped up, I believe Mercedes might be in talks with him, but it's just speculation at this point. But I think any true Formula One fan would want to see a Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel duel as well.
Yeah. I think Mercedes is a fantastic place for Vettel to land. I think it's one of the only places where Vettel would get along with his teammate really well. I mean, Vettel and Hamilton have been fighting for a championship for the past, 3 or 4 years? And maybe if we go back to the McLaren Red Bull days, they were even fighting back then, and they're like best of friends. Maybe that's just for the cameras, but I really doubt that it's just for cameras. So they really get along. So I feel like they could handle, fighting for a championship. And I mean, in reality, I think that if it's not broke, don't fix it. So I think I think Mercedes is going to stick with their driver lineup until it starts failing them. Because, I mean, they were 1-2 in the championship last year. So I think that in reality, I think the most logical place that Vettel goes is he goes home. He goes home and he retires, at least for a season. He might pull an Alonso and start talking about a comeback. But also Raikkonen, I guess he also left and came back. But I really think that 2021 is a year off for Vettel. Now, something that is unlikely that I think a lot of people would love to see is an Alfa Romeo move. Vettel and Raikkonen back together.
Just one more question before we conclude this podcast. Do you think Mercedes will pull out the sport after 2021, or do you think they will stay beyond that?
That's a good question. I think if they do pull out of the sport, I think they will go with that Vettel and Hamilton lineup. I mean, what a way to go out. You get two multiple time champion. If Hamilton wins this year, he's going to be up to 7, so you're going to have 11 championships in your car. And with that people in your car, you're almost guaranteed to get another championship before you leave. So, I mean, Mercedes really has nothing to gain, and they have everything to lose. So they definitely are going to be thinking about that. Maybe they leave on a nice round number like 10 championships. But I think that they're kind of planning their exit strategy right now.
I see. I believe that Mercedes might pull out also, but without the kind of fanfare that you mentioned in your speculation. But I believe that it will possibly shock us in a way, but we're just going to have to wait and see what the future holds for us.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I believe that is it. And I would welcome any comment on my timelines, any criticism, or any kind of thoughts of what you think would have happened in my timelines.
Yeah, and we should be back sometime. I'm considering a bi-monthly release, which either means twice a month or once every other month. So it really depends on how people react to this. I think as we do this sort of thing, it's going to get easier to make and easier to think of ideas. Obviously, we'll eventually run out of ideas, I feel like. So go ahead and put your comments down below, what you think, maybe suggest topics. And yeah, and I just want to thank R&D for joining us.
Well, thank you for letting me be on your show, Foxworth.
Of course, yep. He's a longtime friend. I've been friends for a few years now, so it's good to finally have you on the show. Well, this is a new show, but good to have you on the channel. And yeah, until next time on Formula Paradox, thanks so much for listening.